Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everybody, to the Movie Marquee. I am your host, Erik. With me is Ken and Ted. And today,
Hello.
everybody. And today we're going to be doing a director spotlight on one of my favorite directors, Mr. Sydney Pollack. He's directed some memorable movies, and we'll kind of just go over a little bit of what he's done in his career and life. I'll give you a little background on Mr. Pollack here. Mr. Pollack was born July 1st, 1934 in Lafayette, Indiana, and unfortunately he passed on May 26, 2008 in Los Angeles at the age of 78 of cancer. He's an actor, a director, and a producer. One of the big memorable things about Sydney Pollack is during his career, he has directed 12 different actors in Oscar-nominated performances. Those actors and actresses are Jane Fonda, Gig Young, Susanna York, Barbra Streisand, Paul Newman, Melinda Dillon, Jessica Lange, Dustin Hoffman, Terry Garr, Meryl Streep, Klaus Maria Brandauer, and Holly Hunter. And Young and Lange won Oscars for their performances in Pollack's films. So some pretty heavy hitters there he's worked with.
Didn't Streisand get nominated twice in two of his movies?
Yes. Yeah, she's been nominated for Best Actress several times, but has not won. He did a lot of directing on some TV shows in the 50s and 60s, along with some early acting, kind of get himself revved up in a position of being a world-renowned director, if you will. His spotlight breakthrough movie was the 1969 release They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, starring Jane Fonda, Susanna York, and Gig Young, who was Best Supporting Actor. He won. I think it was nominated for 7 awards that year, I believe. Pretty good for being your major breakthrough movie out of the gate there. Some of his numerous movies that you probably know are Jeremiah Johnson from 1972 with Robert Redford. Of course, The Way We Were, the movie we'll be reviewing here with Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand. The 1974 release Yakuza with Robert Mitchum. The 1975 release 3 Days of the Condor with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. We will be doing that one as well. 1977, he did the movie Bobby Deerfield with Al Pacino. 1979, Electric Horseman with Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. 1981, Absence of Malice with Paul Newman, Sally Field, and Melinda Dillon. 1982, Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman, Jessica Lange, and Terry Garr. Jessica Lange, of course, won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. There's so many great actors and actresses in that movie. We'll be reviewing that one as well, too. Of course, 1985 was the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture, Out of Africa, with Robert Redford and Meryl Streep and Klaus Maria Brandauer. Nice. Thank you. You know, you're very lucky, people. It was very close. We were going to do Out of Africa. It is one of my favorite movies, but I will admit it can be a little dry. It is a long movie, and you really have to be a fan of Robert Redford, Meryl Streep, and the directing style of Sydney Pollack to really, really like it. But apparently people did because it won the best movie, Ken.
Well, some people like sleeping too, so
whatever.
That's probably why they want it.
1990, he did Havana with Robert Redford and Alan Arkin. And 1993 released Affirm, which will be the final movie we will be reviewing with Tom Cruise, Gene Hackman, Ed Harris, and Holly Hunter. 1995, he did Sabrina with Harrison Ford. 1999 did Random Hearts with Harrison Ford. 2005, he did The Interpreter with Nicole Kidman and Sean Penn. And the last movie he directed, and it was kind of a little different. It was actually 2018's Amazing Grace, which dragged out from 1972. It's, of course, Aretha Franklin's live video footage of the recording of her album, Amazing Grace, at one of her churches in Los Angeles. They could not get the rights to this movie or this documentary, if you will, film. And it took until she died because she kept suing people who kept trying to release the footage, ownership rights, and her estate finally let the movie be released in 2018. I've not seen it. I'm not sure how he directed the movie, but he did star in it. Cameos, directorial stuff with other people. A few of the Rolling Stones were in it as well, just kind of giving their sense on the release of that
I wonder why she would have stopped the release of the movie.
She didn't like her likeness being used. She went to court saying, I own the rights to this, and it just kind of went back and forth, dropped off the radar. A few other producers tried to bring it up. She fought it tooth and nail, and then when she died in 2018, the estate let it be finally directed, produced, and released. So it is.
He's also a very noted executive producer. He's been in a number of films like The Fabulous Baker Boys, and I like Searching for Bobby Fischer. That's one of my hidden gem movies that I enjoy a lot. Talented Mr. Ripley, I saw with my wife. I think I like it more than I definitely liked it back then. But in 2008, Recount, he was the executive producer, but he was also going to be the director, but he had to pull out because of the cancer.
A couple days after he backed out, he passed away of cancer. It's sad. And Recount's actually pretty good. I like Recount. He was also a very good actor, and he routinely appeared in many of his own movies as some uncredited roles and some nickel and dime stuff. Some of the notable roles was obviously Tootsie, where he was the agent to Dustin Hoffman. He was an actor in a civil action, Eyes Wide Shut, obviously we know.
Yes.
The movie Changing Lanes, Michael Clayton, and Maid of Honor. Television stuff, a lot of small roles in shows pre-directing in the 50s and 60s, Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock, stuff to that effect. He also had some small roles in the TV show Mad About You, Just Shoot Me. Of course, he was Will Truman's father in the TV show Will and Grace. And he had a few roles in The Sopranos and Entourage.
Yeah, his cameo in The Sopranos was really good.
Yeah. So he's been one of my directors for, I can't even count, many years. I'll be honest, Tootsie was the movie that really brought me to appreciate Sydney Pollack's directing and acting. I loved him in that movie with his directing and his acting. I thought he was hysterical in it. Ever since then, I've really just gone through his library, and I've really, really enjoyed his movies.
He studied school to be an actor, and then he, I guess, became dialogue coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he came out to help his friend with one of his movies. And I guess Burt Lancaster was the one who actually told him that he should become a director. Yeah, Burt Lancaster is the reason why we have Sydney Pollack as a director.
Very cool.
I knew him as an actor. My first real introduction was like you, Eric, is through seeing Tootsie. I can't exactly remember the first time I saw it, but later on in college, and I started to discover what directing styles and directors that I liked. I sought out more of his stuff. I'll be honest, two of the movies that we are reviewing, The Way We Were and 3 Days of the Condor, I have not seen. So I'm definitely anxious to see those, but The Firm is a really good movie. But how I got to listen to him, how he described directing and everything was through the Stanley Kubrick collection movies, and because he pops up as an interview subject on a couple of the documentaries about Stanley Kubrick and how much he liked him, and he talked about how their styles contrasted. He had some really good things to say, of course, about Stanley, otherwise they probably wouldn't have used it in that documentary.
It's funny you mention that because, all things come back to Stanley Kubrick, of course, but directing styles are completely different because really the way that Sydney Pollack directs, he doesn't like to rehearse. He doesn't like his actors and actresses to rehearse, and he likes to do everything pretty much on the fly, trying to do stuff in 2, 3, or 4 shots, not 20, 30, 80 shots as a Stanley Kubrick would do, trying to get that perfect scene, which obviously, it's going to be just a different acting style from the people who are working with the director, but it is kind of funny how they are completely opposites on the spectrum.
Completely. And Stanley must have thought something of him because I guess when shooting Eyes Wide Shut, he gave Sydney Pollack more latitude than any other actor that was in the movie. His takes and his scenes didn't take nearly as much time as everyone else. In a certain sense, Stanley was deferential to Sydney Pollack in that manner. So there must have been some definite respect between the two of them.
Kind of gave him a little bit of acting leeway where
where he never freedom, gave that,
which is very, very rare for
yes, extremely.
I've never heard of that in any movies from Stanley Kubrick, but I mean that is late in Kubrick's life obviously too.
Yeah, true. Even though he was kind of reclusive in his estate in England, he kept up with things, and it wouldn't surprise me if he wasn't a fan of Out of Africa, because it is a beautifully shot movie. It's a little dry, but not every movie is going to be a Jerry Bruckheimer explosion fest. Sometimes you have to appreciate things. There's some art there.
And especially of that era. I mean, movies of the 80s, really, a lot of them were dramatic roles. You didn't have your standout, CGI stuff that really played effect. A lot of dramatic roles.
We're talking about directing styles, and we're kind of comparing him to Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick needs to get it perfect, whereas Sydney Pollack, he's definitely not a perfectionist. He gets what he gets. I almost want to say moves on. I don't have a lot to say about him because I only have a handful of movies that I have seen. I have not seen Jeremiah Johnson. I have not seen 3 Days to the Condor yet. I'm looking forward to reviewing that. The Way We Were is what we're going to be doing for our first movie, and I hadn't seen that since I was a teenager, and we know what teenagers probably thought of that in the 80s. It's interesting the body of work that he has. Tootsie probably was the first movie I saw of his, but I probably didn't know him as a director until I saw The Firm.
Sydney Pollack's directing style, being in contrast to Kubrick, really, like you mentioned, Kubrick wants that take perfect 70, 80 times. He wants it perfect. The directing style of Sydney Pollack is, you know what? I will do it in the editing floor. Actually, all the movies that I mentioned here prior, the editing was a very key piece along with the production. A lot of stuff was cut out. And in the movie that we're going to be reviewing, The Way We Were, there were a lot of scenes that were cut out of that movie that in 1973, when it was released, he believed was the right move. But in retrospect, after the fact, he does admit that those scenes probably should have been kept in there. He still thinks it's a great movie, but he does understand why people, after they've seen these scenes, they're like, you really probably should have kept these in here. It probably would have only added maybe 10, 15 minutes to the movie. You would have been over 2 hours. I think the running time on that's like an hour 58, give or take. But for whatever reason at the time, he said he felt that those scenes should have been taken out. And they were really, really good scenes. So he does, a lot of his directing style is actually in the editing floor.
That's interesting because there's a couple of those scenes that I can't wait to talk about because I would agree that they would have added a lot to the movie. It's an interesting style to direct. I don't know if it's necessarily directing to the editing floor, but it's interesting always to see what a director will cut out of a movie rather than keep it in. That has always fascinated me. It's one of those things that I would like to know what those decisions were. And it sounds like that in interviews, Sydney Pollack was very forthcoming about those decisions, kind of like how Scorsese has been when he has talked about what it's like to cut one of his movies, even though I guess not a whole lot was actually cut out of The Irishman. I think I'm still watching that movie.
Pushing 4 hours at one point.
It was close.
It's a great movie, but it is a long movie. It's a long movie.
It's a haul.
Took me 2020 just to watch it all.
But
that movie is a movie. You honestly, you got to sit down and watch it in one sitting. I know, like you said, Ken, and you said, Ted, you're still going through it.
Oh no, I've watched it a couple of times.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You got to watch that thing all the way through.
So you're talking about Scorsese. I think it's interesting that Scorsese falls in love with certain actors himself. Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro. So with Pollack, you have Robert Redford as being kind of like his go-to guy. Watching Pollack on interviews, he just seems like he's very humble. At least in my opinion, he comes off being very humble. But he seems to be like, after he's directed you in a movie, he wouldn't mind going out for a cup of coffee with you. It just seems like that's the kind of director he is. Whereas Stanley Kubrick was great on the set, but after the set, there wasn't that same relationship.
Depends on who you were.
I guess so.
Depends on who you were, especially with being that we're in February of 2021, a recent interview with Shelley Duvall has come forth where it was talked about the tortures that she went through. But, you're right, though, Ken. He does seem very deferential and very humble towards his actors. And I think that comes from being an actor. I think that plays a huge part in that, because if you look at other actors that have become directors, they're kind of the same way. They're very giving towards their actors. And, and we talk about that he has his couple of people that he goes to all the time. And we had just mentioned, too, about only needing a few takes and whatnot. But when you're dealing with the likes of Robert Redford and Paul Newman, it's hard to sit there and go, maybe we need to do this 7 or 8 times.
Yeah.
I mean, And even Jane Fonda, a very underrated actress. We're talking about the best of the best when you're talking about Redford and Newman and Meryl Streep and even Sally Field and Dustin Hoffman. I mean, who can't forget Dustin Hoffman? Those are consummate professionals. Those are the top of the
Well,
top of the mountain.
very funny you mention that because Ken was bringing up that he's a very likable guy and you kind of want to go have a beer with him and everything. And yeah, Redford and him were great friends from prior 1960s. They started acting together. They became really, really good friends. But one of the funny stories, and I say this with sarcasm, is the disdain that Dustin Hoffman and Sydney Pollack had on the set of Tootsie. So much that Dustin Hoffman said, you know what? You should probably play my agent in this movie because you're such a prick. And he said, you know what? I think I will. And he did. And the tension that they actually had on the set was actually real life tension. They did not like each other at all.
It's probably more Dustin Hoffman than I would think would be Pollack, just from what I know about Dustin Hoffman.
I would think so. Yeah, Dustin Hoffman, I know, and Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep despise each other on the set of
Kramer versus Kramer.
Kramer versus Kramer. He actually made her cry for real life on those scenes because he was such an asshole. So yeah, I've heard numerous stories about Dustin Hoffman, but I have not heard any disdain regarding Sydney Pollack or any hatred of any actors and actresses except for Dustin Hoffman. So in the interviews I've seen, he seems like a real likable guy. Like you said, Ted, very forthcoming, very easy to talk to, very easy to interview, not hiding anything, not, pompous, not high on himself. And, honestly, it's probably his Jewish background, his Jewish upbringing with his family that really brought him down to earth.
One movie that he did as a director, Sabrina, which is a remake of Billy Wilder's classic film.
Not a great
remake. Not a bad remake, but not a great. This is how I look at Sydney Pollack. He did not want to do that movie. First of all, he didn't want to do that movie because how can you top Billy Wilder? Harrison Ford went to him on a number of occasions and wanted him to direct the film. Yeah. If an actor seeks you out to direct a film, that says something about you as a director.
Exactly.
So yeah, an actor like Harrison Ford. I mean, Harrison Ford is so established by 1995, I believe, was when the movie came out.
95, yeah. He was like a Robert Redford. He was right up there in those movies in the 90s.
Very top of the heap. And I do kind of like the movie Sabrina. I thought it was a pretty good movie.
It was okay. It wasn't Billy Wilder, obviously.
No,
it wasn't that thing, but it was okay.
In the original Sabrina, wasn't it the lady from Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Yes, Audrey Hepburn.
Audrey Hepburn. You can't really.
Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, Audrey Hepburn. And
Aubrey James.
James. How are you really going to top that? I thought they did pretty good.
I enjoyed Greg Kinnear. I probably the most out of all the actors in that movie, to be perfectly honest with you. It was actually the female lead in the Sabrina that I forget her name, but I feel like she's the one that kind of turned me off on the movie. I couldn't see why Kinnear or Harrison Ford were actually fighting for her. Whereas I get it with Hepburn in the original flick, why that was the case.
I thoroughly enjoy Sydney Pollack. I like him as a director and an actor a lot. I'm looking forward to the 4 movies that we're doing.
And those 4 movies we are going to be doing, The Way We Were, 3 Days of the Condor, Tootsie, and we're going to be wrapping it up with The Firm.
I'm looking forward to doing this because, like I said earlier, I don't think I have an opinion yet of Sydney Pollack. I mean, I know Tootsie and I know The Firm, but we're doing The Way We Were and 3 Days of the Condor. I've never seen that movie, and I'm interested to see how it plays out. Kind of like how Ted was Stanley Kubrick. I'm coming in unsure about this director.
Well, the movies that I have chosen, and it was very hard. I mean, Malice was definitely one I wanted to do with Paul Newman and Sally Field. Out of Africa, I mean, winning the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1985. It's hard to pass on that movie. But when I really got down to it, I thought these 4 movies definitely spotlight and showcase the acting diversity of Sydney Pollack. And I think the movies themselves really speak for themselves. Most people in our age bracket, being in our mid-40s, generally have seen The Firm, are familiar with Tom Cruise. Tootsie is one of those movies that was shown on cable like every 8 minutes, so people really have seen that. But when it comes to 3 Days of the Condor being a political thriller, that one you really don't see very often on cable. Most people of our age bracket probably have not seen it. And The Way We Were is one of those movies probably our parents fell in love with, and dare I say grandparents. But I think it's a great movie, and I'm really looking forward to reviewing all 4 of these movies.
As a final question, because this is your person, Erik.
Yes.
What do you think is the definitive Sydney Pollack movie?
That is a really great question. My opinion or reality?
Your opinion. That's what we're doing here.
My opinion when it comes to Sydney Pollack, I really think overall that Tootsie is definitive as a comedy. See, that's a hard question to ask because you've got drama, you've got romance, you've got comedy, you've got political action thrillers, you've got so many diverse. And the movies that I've chosen really pick all the genres. I think most people are probably going to pick Out of Africa just because it was nominated and for so many awards, won so many awards. Robert Redford and Meryl Streep. I mean, it's just such an iconic movie and an iconic role for both characters. But for me, I think Tootsie is the one that really stands out.
Very good.
And I picked Tootsie because you've got so many great actors in that movie. That is a movie where, unlike a lot of his prior movies, his earlier movies that are really geared on 1 or 2 or 3 actors or actresses, the supporting roles of everybody in that movie make it.
Right.
I mean, Bill
Right.
Murray, come on. I mean,
Right,
there are
right.
so many great roles. I mean, Ted or Ken, I'm totally drawing a blank. You're one of your favorite actresses in Tootsie. Come on, Charles Durning.
Oh, yes, Charles Durning.
Yes, Charles Durning. The supporting roles in that movie, there are so many great actors and actresses that all bind it together. It's just such a great movie.
Charles Durning, to me, is the best character actor of my generation. Like, if we're talking from 70 to like mid 2000s, I don't think there's a better character actor than Charles Durning.
And you liked him in Tootsie.
He's one of the reasons why I enjoyed that film.
There you go. So
your generation being the generation from the 1800s that first started the movie craze?
The Pepsi generation, I think, is what he's referring to.
I'm part of the Pepsi generation. Is correct, Erik.
Yes.
Oh, I was thinking the 1800s. Sorry.
Listen here, young whippersnapper.
Back in the Nickelodeon days where you put your nickel in and watch the movie.
I'm looking forward to people who listen to this go, who the hell's Robert Redford? That's what I'm looking forward to hearing. Yeah. They're out there.
If you are listening and you don't know who Robert Redford is,
just skip to the next director in a few weeks and we'll
be prepared. And
be prepared.
Plus, shame on you.
Shame on you.
This almost became a Robert Redford retrospective instead of Sydney Pollack.
Very closely.
Really quickly became that.
Could have picked 4 Robert Redford films with Pollack very easily.
But I think people would know who Robert Redford is. I mean, he was just in the Marvel movies. He's in Winter Soldier, and he shows up again at the Endgame, too. So people might know.
Way to bring it to superheroes. Robert Redford, known for his superhero movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He disappeared a little bit there in the 90s. He was still there pretty strongly in the 80s.
We're wrapping this up, and we're going to move into the 1973 release, The Way We Were, with Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand. That'll be our first movie we will be reviewing by the director Sydney Pollack. See you at the movies.
See you then.
See you at the Movie Marquee. Take care.